Florida State hires Tony White to be its next defensive coordinator.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst and college football writer. Thank you for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to talk some Noles with me. Today's show is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Tony White will be the next Seminoles head coach, as reported by numerous sources around the internet. And I'm just going to go ahead and run with it. Florida State wouldn't be messing around with this in the first place with everybody reporting it. So here we go. I did a little show on him earlier, along with Terrence Knighton, who I think will come as well. We'll see if that comes to fruition. He's the defensive line coach at Nebraska. But for now, this show is 100% about Mr. Tony White. So here's what you need to know about him from a background and everything, just straightforward, just the short nitty gritty. Number one, his base defense is a 3-3-5. It will be a change for Florida State. Number two, this is a guy that has coached at different stops, but he doesn't have a lot of ties to Florida, although he was actually born in Florida. But he went to school at UCLA. He's coached at New Mexico and some other places out west. I'm curious to see how he adapts down south. Number three, this is a guy that has had a lot of success without what I would personally call elite talent. No offense to Nebraska, no offense to Arizona State, places like that. They get good players. They don't get overwhelming talent where they can have, quote unquote, an off day in terms of being mentally prepared and still whip up on somebody. Florida State can get that kind of talent in a traditional year. So I'm curious to see what he can do with Florida State's talent here pretty quick. Number four, and maybe most importantly, Nebraska's defense was disciplined, very disciplined. If they can instill that in Florida State, and again, you're going to have more talent overall on the roster, there's a chance for Florida State to return a little quicker to prominence than what I'd originally thought. To be honest, and maybe I should have led with this, I'm surprised Florida State was able to attract Mr. White. I'd said it for weeks, and a lot of other people on this channel that comment on the YouTube page had brought it up too, rightfully so. Why would you come? Norvell, the Florida State administration, whomever it may have been that contributed, here's the tip of the cap. You've earned it. This is a guy that made a lot of money, 1.6 to 1.9, depending on bonuses and whatnot. He was getting paid at Nebraska. So Florida State ponied up because you're not going to take a lateral move or whatever you want to call it, something similar, go to a place where coach is on the hot seat and take less money. So they obviously are going to pay him. I'll be curious to see what is put into context in terms of how his structure is made up. Is there a big buyout, a small buyout? What are his bonuses? What's his base? All those things will be interesting. But let's kind of go back through what he brings and how this impacts Florida State. Number one, the defensive change is something that is important to note. As I said in the podcast earlier today, White is a good football coach, but one that's going to bring a different scheme. A three-man line changes things. You can still run a one gap with that, but as a general rule, and it's pretty consistent, you need a big nose guard. Florida State has some of those guys. How can they translate in making that a good defense, not just down the road, but like in 2025, out the gate? You're playing Alabama in game one, so you better have something ready. Second part of that, can they get somebody in the portal to help, an older player? They got like Denise White and some different guys. Got Kevin Wynn, hopefully will be coming. A lot of good players on the trenches are possible, but they still need to add another veteran, in my opinion, at that nose guard spot, at least one. The strong side ends and how you'd use those are a little different. And one of the edge guys will be a stand-up. They call it a jack, a pass rusher, kind of the old school 3-4 defense that you'll see. A lot of guys in the NFL run it. Basically what Belichick ran in New England. Bill Parcells ran when once Taylor was causing havoc in the NFL in the 1980s. As the stand-up outside linebacker. He kind of revolutionized football. Florida State always gets those kind of guys. I'm not as worried about that, but it will be interesting because, is it Marvin Jones? Is it somebody else? Who's going to be that player and who can rotate in? Those nose guard and that true pass rushing spot will be very, very important. The linebacker group, will be also interesting. There's different ways you can run a 3-3-5. They had around 230-pound linebackers at Nebraska, but another version of that, like they had at Wisconsin a few years ago, they had 250 to 260-pound linebackers. So not sure, but I think that's a totally different scheme because they truly two-gapped. They weren't trying to outrun you. They were trying to stuff you. And while Tony White's defense is good against the run, I'll give a few numbers here in a second. This is a very important thing to note. They do it a little different than some others. They still use speed just as much as they do power, even though they got guards that aren't being taken up necessarily on a given play by an interior defensive lineman. Those linebackers better know how to get off of a block because they can get engulfed. It's pretty big size disparity, sometimes roughly 100 pounds. So that's intriguing. Also in the back end, I expect to see a lot of different stuff. I'm curious how they do things with Patrick Surtain. He's a guy that's played a lot of man defense. He's an excellent DB coach. How does he fit into that? Are they going to change how the nickel works? The 3-3-5, you still have a hybrid guy over the slot. Or they had a pretty good size player that was 210 for part of the time they were at Nebraska this year. Are they going to use some smaller guys? Because like North Carolina, Clemson, some of these teams use really fast slot receivers. If you do not have the ability to adapt to that and willingness to do it on 1st and 10, that's a problem. My only concern here is he really tries to stuff the run, which I get, but sometimes you got to give to get. You can't give up explosives in this league just because a kid outruns you on an under route or deep over, and he just outruns a safety. You slot against the safety on a deeper route. If you get pass protection, that's not going to work well. So I'm curious to see some of those things. But overall, just talking about him, I'm excited about the hire. Shows that Florida State A is willing to go spend money. That's a fact because, again, he was making a lot of cash at Nebraska. They didn't just hire somebody easy and convenient. They went after a big name. His stats were good. Again, I'll go over those in a second. And then finally, he's a guy that's won at different spots without a ton of talent. Those are really big parts of this. If you can win at places where they're not getting premium talent, at least win on his side of the ball. I know Nebraska, their offense is so bad. It's hard, but they get a lot of value out of their players on defense. It's going to help Florida State. So here are the numbers again, and I had this in the earlier podcast today too. Rush defense this year at Nebraska, 105.8, that's 14th. Pass, 209.7, that's 52nd. Total D, 315.4, that's 19th. Scoring, 19.8, that's also 19th. Sacks, 27, that's 50th. Passing plays of 20 or more yards, they gave up 27 of them, that's 50th. Or 30 of them, that's 29th. And then running plays of 20 or more yards, they gave up 10 of them, that's 23rd. Turnovers, they created 16, that's 67. Third downs, 34%, that's 32nd. Red zone, 21.9, that is 57th. And tackles for loss, 74, that's 43rd. They are a good defense without a lot of talent. They have some guys that have a chance. There's even a report about one of the guys may end up transferring over and all that. I'm not going to dive into that. Right now, just be happy that Florida State is spending the money. They're going to have more character and leadership because they've got to focus to win like they did on that side of the ball in Nebraska because they weren't just out talenting teams. And again, finally, the scheme is unique. It'll be fun to kind of talk about that all off season, next spring, through the summer, and even into fall camp because it is an adjustment. There's a lot more complexity to a 3-man with defensive line than a 4-man. So that's a talking point for now and until Tony White is no longer coaching in Tallahassee. With that, once again, thank you very much for making Locked On Seminoles your first listen each and every day. I truly appreciate you stopping to talk Seminoles with me. If you have not already, please hit that subscription, hit that like, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast. If you have questions, go ahead and fire them away. I might do a little mailbag of some kinds with the questions and stuff coming out of this, any coaching hire or anything about it, the portal, etc. Fire away. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Finally, you can find me on X at FBScout_Florida. Everybody have a good one. Take care.